now that it's been, been going so long.
Yep. And then so as soon as it says stream meetings now streaming on Facebook, I just got the little thing. If I were you, I would just pretend that I'm on, right? Because sometimes we get your video and you're like shuffling. There's like 15 seconds, 20 seconds.
Well, because I'm waiting because I have no cue. So how do we know when I'm on?
He doesn't show up on mine.
What I'm telling you is that as soon as you click it, just pretend you're on. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So and we're on. So.
All right. Yeah. Well, welcome everybody. This has been a massive lack of fun right now. Trying to get Zoom to work, and we have lots of things going on here. And in fact, this is the book launch. You have made it to the right place, kind of, I think. And so let me, I'm John Paul Mendocha. I'm John Paul Mendocha, the Raging Verbalist. And we have just been going through, 19 minutes of fun trying to get this thing up and running. Let me see if I can get this thing set properly. I guess I'm set. It's set. I'm going to be. So today is the day. It's the 17th of March. It is St. Patrick's Day, and it is the launch of the book. The book is now finally here. You can go and order it on Amazon. You can go order it on Barnes & Noble, your favorite bookstore. You can also go to positiontowinbook.com and get it. But this is the official launch day. Of course, Murphy is riding along and kicking our ass and doing all of that kind of stuff. So let me quickly get into this thing so we can, kind of shake that off and move forward. They say never work with animals, children when you're doing shows. And of course, we would add technology to that list. But let's get serious about this. So the book is a journey, and this journey has taken a bunch of time. In fact, hard to believe, but March the 6th, which was a Tuesday, 2018, Gabe and I met in Dallas and kind of started talking about Position to Win, which is really the system that we ended up putting together. This book is what we call the first ACE in the series. Now, hopefully we're going to see more than one, but we finally got this done. So the gestation period of this is 742 days, and it was a rather intense process, to say the least. For those who've been following along on this, you'll probably also know that it has taken me in excess of 30 years to get my first book out, but it is out, and it is hopefully available. Yesterday, Murphy was biting us a little bit there, and we were getting a little heart palpitations about Amazon, but it does show up that it's available for one-click purchase. Yay! That means we are somebody's, because we're now up on Amazon, and that is a very interesting thing to have happen. That's finally shown up. We can use as many 5-star reviews as we can get. Please read the book over, enjoy the book, and we're going to be going through the book in a little bit. Now, before we do that, there's a bunch of people that I want to thank and share this moment with. So one of the things is the fact that this book would not have happened had Gabe and I connected, and as we are co-conspirators on this book, it took a lot of thinking to work through what should and shouldn't be in it. And so my thanks are to Gabe, who's joining on the call today and joining on the Facebook Live. So Gabe, thanks a lot. Gabe, I don't know if you want to say a couple of words, but without Gabe, there would be no book. So Gabe, what do you want to say?
I don't know how good my audio is because I didn't plan on just jumping here, but if you guys hear me okay. So yeah, you're very welcome, John. It's been a journey. It's been also my privilege and pleasure, and we've learned a lot, and it's been crazy. It's like the gestation of an elephant, right? I think it is 24 months that an elephant, it's sitting there, cooking and getting ready, and so that's kind of what we did. I mean, and it was just as painful, but also as momentous and as big, and now that it's out there, and now that people can go buy it in Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and all these places, it's a good feeling. So yep.
Excellent. And then I also want to thank Lynn Adelstein, who helped us through the process and layout and, listening to, helping, craft the book and making sure that the graphics came up the right way. And my wife, Rebecca, who edited the book and of course, coaxed these stories out of me one by one. And in fact, was working on the book while she was with her family reunion last year. Want to thank her. There's lots of other people to thank. Go buy the book. We have lots of acknowledgments and all of those things. So you can go find all of that out. Now, one of the things that I can tell you without a fact is that Murphy always rides for free. And Murphy was with us all through the journey. Murphy is not mentioned in the book, but it's being mentioned today because of just what we're going through now. By the way, green screen will have to suffice for a green, me wearing something green. A good friend of mine said, wear something green, John, at St. Patrick's Day. But I can tell you one problem with that is that when I put something on and tested the green screen, of course, hours ago, when all of this was working smoothly without any fail, well, it didn't show up because it blanked me out. So, I changed out of that and put on something that would actually show up. Green screen doesn't work because I'm on the backup computer. So one of the other things that you should learn as a lesson is that, one is none. You should always have a backup to a backup to a backup. Make sure you do that. Also joining us today is the lovely Sandra. Sandra is our, marketing manager and booker. So if any of you out there want to do a podcast with us, you'll be talking and connecting with Sandra. And Sandra, thank you for the help that you've done in trying to get this stuff promoted. So that's that. I can tell you that we are launching this book. This book is getting put in place in probably the worst headwind that you could probably do it in. It is worse than the biggest hurricane, because unlike a hurricane, which would affect, Florida and flooding in, places, the coronavirus is just, this giant, map of, what's going on and all of that. So we are launching it in that headwind. So those of you who have actually gotten onto this call and bared with us through the technical glitch, all I can tell you is that you know what, you just got to keep marching forward. Now, some would say that, well, maybe you could see this coming. 742 days ago, as we were sitting in a Starbucks in Dallas, I don't think that we saw this coming. If we did, well, we sure would have sold a lot of stock short. And then if we did that, it would also, I would question why we would even show up, because it would be just big stacks of money. Did not see that coming. So that's kind of an interesting, circumstance. There's a great resource that goes with the book. So we didn't just produce a book. We didn't just get the book pulled together, but there is a website called positiontowinbook.com, positiontowinbook.com. There's lots of resources. And even if those people who are too cheap to buy the book, come on, it's $10 on Kindle, but go out there and pick up the book. But there are resources on the positiontowinbook.com. You can also register, so you can join the Facebook group. If you're watching this on the Facebook group, you already know that. We continue to put out material every Friday. I talk about, I have a topic I talk about. As we're doing this live right now, if you go and ask a question, Sandra will feed that to me, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. But that is a great resource that we've put together, and we continue to grow it, and we expect that it's going to grow over time, and that this is going to continue to expand and expand and expand. When you put together a book, when somebody tells you should write a book, the first reaction should be, do you actually have enough material to write a book? And then once you have that kind of over that hurdle, because there's lots of books out there in Amazon land, not going to, pick any titles, where there really isn't enough material to fill up something the size of a leaflet, but people have expanded it into an ebook of some kind. So when we started writing this book, or actually when we started the process of this, is that we put together a program called Position to Win, and we started to deliver it. And you talk about wild-eyed, dewy-eyed optimists is we thought, you know what, we'll put together 6 webinars, we'll talk about this topic, and away we go. And in fact, Gabe was the original catalyst to getting the book started and actually getting the Position to Win program started, because as we were sitting in that Starbucks in Dallas, he pointed out to me that we, in fact, many of the things that I talked about in how to do positioning and how to set that up, though it was important that I had given him resources. For those of you who don't know, this is we believe a successor to Position to Win, The Battle for Your Mind, which was written by Al Reeves and Jack Trout, released in 1981. And I can tell you that we started talking about this and we said, we're going to put together this program and we're going to invite select group of people. We were going to call it a beta program so everybody would know that it was a work in progress. And I always like to, by the way, join things pretty early on, even though you'll see a lot of the behind the scenes and how things get a little bit crazy, but you always learn something. I've always experienced that you'll learn more. I mean, it's great when you see it way down the road. In fact, I had that experience many times in my life where I want to be that kind of early adopter and be there and watching how this sausage is made and how it all gets put together, because I think that you get some more insight. Well, so here we were, 6 webinars, 6 hours of material. How hard could that be? First webinar went, Gabe, how many hours did the first webinar go?
Something like 3 hours, I think.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And we were delivering it and we were getting tired, sleepy, tired. We almost had, we needed to like give people yoga mats so we could take little naps in it. So we kind of got some pushback from our beta people who said, man, this is crazy. This is as long as a speech in an authoritarian country,
Yeah, one of those Fidel Castro speeches.
Yeah, one of those Castro speeches. Yeah, where they preempt everything on television, and they play baseball at midnight because he talks for 6 hours.
All the channels are on him.
That's it. I mean, it's great when you have 100% share there. So we didn't quite have that. So what we did is we then started getting better at this. And when it was all said and done, Position to Win as a program, which is out there, is like pushing 35 hours of material. Now that 35 hours doesn't end up getting condensed into a single book. There's actually more sections to go through. Now, as we were putting this together, one of my concerns is that I didn't want the book to look like a lot of these self-published books that you've probably seen, which is that first off, they didn't have anybody who understood, well, English wasn't their first language, may not have even been their second language, may have been God knows what language. What we want to do is we want to make sure it was real. And I really wanted it to be over, a certain page count and cover some topics and get serious. And when you go out and you look at the book, I'm very proud of it. In Kindle, it's over 300 pages. It's well over, it's like 280 pages in, paperback, which is now available, as we've said, and feel like it really took on a life of its own. And when you sit there and you write a book, you have to think, how do you get it kicked off? So I'm going to share the initial story that's in the book, and that is probably my very first, that I can recall, my very first positioning and lesson, because every single one of us, and this tied back to what Gabe and I had discovered in Dallas, which is every single person has a bias map or a bunch of bias maps, and that's how you connect to it. So here I am, 5 years old. I go to meet my grandmother on my father's side, which is the only time I'll ever see her. We get to New York. Now, we didn't have flying was out of the question. We drove from Denver to New York City, and I did not realize that I would get my very first positioning marketing lesson. And my bias map was already set at 5 years old. And what happened is that my grandmother had my brother and I sitting there, and she looked at us and smiled, wanting to do something nice for her grandsons, and said, well, do you like chicken noodle soup? And we looked at each other and we were very happy and smiling and saying, oh, absolutely, we like chicken noodle soup. That's a really cool idea. Let's get some chicken noodle soup. And she then proceeded to start working on making us chicken noodle soup. Now, as we sat there and the minutes turned into hours, we were getting a little bit nervous because maybe grandma didn't really know what she was doing. And our mindset, my bias map is that it came out of a red and white can. It said Campbell's on it and it said chicken noodle soup. And we kept looking at each other and I kept wondering, how hard is it to open the can, pour the can in, fill the can up with water, pour that in, mix it up, put on the heat. I had watched my mother do it many times and we'd be eating soup pretty quick. Well, that isn't how grandma made soup. What she did is she made soup the old fashioned way with a real chicken, with real noodles, and you had to go do this entire process. And when she delivered the soup to us, to my chagrin and horror, there was something floating in my soup, something I never saw at a Campbell soup can, something I was kind of shocked at. I didn't even know that this existed. And there was a foot floating in my soup, in my bowl. And this foot turned out to be from the chicken that gave its life so we could have chicken noodle soup. Now, both my brother and I stopped and looked at each other. Something was definitely amiss. I mean, I've never seen anything like that come out of that red and white can. And if I had, we would have had, the potential lawsuit time or something. But there it was. Now, my father finds out that, well, we have basically dissed my grandmother because we have rejected wholeheartedly her soup. And we have pushed it back and said, wait a second, no, that isn't, grandma, that isn't chicken noodle soup. And of course, it was probably great chicken noodle soup. Had no idea how good it was. And we sat there because my father convinced us rather sternly that we were going to finish our bowl. So I kept trying to get the foot to stick to the side of the bowl and do as little turbulence as possible as I ate that soup carefully, because the last thing I wanted was that foot to touch anything that was going to touch me. That is a perfect example of a bias map. And a bias map is something that's inside of your head. And if you go out there and you start understanding what your own bias maps are, what you'll discover is that bias maps affect every single thing that you do. And in fact, everything that takes place in your life. Now, this happens a lot to people who are, grow up in one culture and go to another culture, which is exactly what happened. My grandmother grew up on the Polish-Ukrainian border. My grandmother knew how to make soup. And as far as she was concerned, nobody bought soup in a can because that, in her mind, was not soup. It was garbage. But in our mind, that was soup. And in fact, that persisted throughout my life. So when you go out there and you start looking around, the point of the story isn't just the fact that, if there's a foot floating in your soup, you got to be a little cautious. But what it really tells us is that positioning is all around us, bias maps are all around us, and we need to learn from those incidents. We need to learn on what's going on. And if you do that, what you'll find out is that positioning is the cornerstone. And it is the reason why when we say most businesses fail in their first 5 minutes, it just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize it, position to win, is that they don't ever ask themselves a simple question, which is, how are we positioned in the market, in the minds of our prospects, and also vis-a-vis our competitors and the alternatives that exist out there. Gabe, any comments that you want to make? Because I know coming from Colombia, you have a different sense, and you probably saw from your own situation where maybe grandma or aunts or something made food just a little bit different than they do in Dallas.
Well, I guess I had the inverse, right? I had the chicken noodle soup with the foot, and that was the normal thing, and everything else was, what is this? And so I'm moving from Colombia to the States in the late like early 2000s was like almost like traveling in the future. These days, things are more globalized, so things kind of even out. But at that time, the internet was, taking off, like really taking off seriously. My first browsing around the internet was in Colombia, right? But throughout my schooling, I still went to the library. Used to have to look at the cards to find the book, right? The library card. You're like looking through them, and okay, this is where the book is, and you go to the stack and start trying to find the book, So it's almost like I kind of grew up. I feel like I grew up like in the 70s here, as opposed to the 90s, right? So it's a very interesting kind of realization when you start seeing that reality is like this thing that changes and it's different for other people in other places as your own. And those are, as you call them, positioning lessons. And you get to like learn that actually there are people who love what you hate, and there are people who hate what you love. And it's like, wow, like how is that even possible? How could people do that? And it's it's one of those principles. And it's interesting that you mentioned there at the end that even though you had that experience and you kind of went through that, you still held your belief to be, well, yeah, I mean, we wanted to kind of appease grandma, but that's really not chicken noodle soup. And that's actually how this stuff works. It's very, very difficult to change people's minds. People are not infinitely malleable or infinitely manipulative to each other. They're not. There are limits to what that's going to be. We tend to change more generationally rather than an individual. It's very hard for an individual to go from believing that the white is white and black is black to changing it to for a generation to make that switch of accepting an innovation. That's why younger people seem to take up technology a lot easier, right? Because they go, oh well, this is what it is. This is what we have, right? As opposed to other people that have gone through maybe a learning curve, and they go, well, but we used to do it this way or this way or this way or this way, and so now I get a new way. So and that will continue to happen for a very long time. So yeah, it's a very interesting process, because I think one of the things that I've learned most from you is that, look, there are lessons everywhere. And the question is, are you paying attention to those lessons? We're living through a lesson right now. What does COVID-19 coronavirus have to do with positioning? Well, I don't know. Let me see. Everything. And so now it becomes this wave, this tsunami that is totally sweeping every attention, every energy that people are talking about. Why? Because we don't know what's going to happen. What everybody's trying to figure out, what does this mean? How is this going to change my job, or the ways that I operate, or the ways that we as a society work together? We don't know. And that's why everybody keeps running through the same set of facts again and again and again and again. We have no new ones, right? We know very little. We're getting to know a little bit more, but very little. But we're going again and again and again, because we're trying to figure out, what will this mean to our reality? So an event like this has a tendency to, really try to mold and change a lot of things. But even then, people will be resistant to, well, but can we just go back to normal? Well, what is normal, right? Well, normal is the things that we knew before. But yeah, so it's interesting how all these things are lessons, and we're either players and active participants, or passive and kind of passengers of what's going to happen. And I think it's by understanding all these things in positioning, and that simple story and that simple start of the book. In case you are out there who have not read the book, it's very easy to read. Is that we've made it with John put a lot of stories. I'm kind of maybe I tend to be more academic. I'm much more boring than John, but we have a lot of stories that illustrate all those points, all those things that really bring all this stuff to life that you and I are facing even now.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're out there and you're saying, so, if anybody was going to invent a great positioned pandemic, this is it. This is the first internet-based, at light speed, plague, whatever we want to call it. It's not a plague, but a virus that goes around the globe, and it is consuming lots of cycles. It's consuming lots of thought, consuming a lot of things. I happened to be at the Costco over the weekend. In fact, I think we posted the video, and what I just called it batshit crazy at Costco, because there were people waiting and waiting in line, and they got to get water, they got to get this, they got to get that. Now, I'm all for being prepared. The thing that I'm just very interested in is watching that, where were these people before? I mean, I've traveled a lot around the world, and I'm always amazed when I'm at a place and somebody is buying like a single roll of toilet paper. I mean, it's like unless you think this is the end, I would like buy more than one personally, but but now people have like awakened to this and have a higher sensitivity to it, and now they're thinking about what they want to do. So yeah, COVID-19 coronavirus is positioned. It's blocking everybody else out. It shows you how a bias map creates almost like an eclipse of the sun. I mean, it's just blocking things out, and it changes what's going to happen. In fact, it's changed what we're doing today, because we had carefully planned, March the 17th, we're going to do this book launch. Life is going to be good. We have a book marketing coach. We have a publicity agent. We have a marketing manager. We have this brain trust pulled together. And of course, what do our book marketing guys say over the weekend? Wow, if you can spin it into a COVID-19 story, well, then you're going to be good. Everybody else, get to the back of the line, get out of the way. Our PR guy just sent out a, hey, don't quit sending me money email. I mean, I know he didn't say it quite that way, but that's really what it is. Hey, hang in there with me. We're still telling everybody, but by the way, if you have any kind of angle that can tie it into the virus, man, I can get you on every show possible. It's just, and it's just kind of amazing to watch. So, we're having fun with it. The book has gone through lots of transitions. And what I mean by that is that last year, because I'd like to share how we launched the book originally, but it actually wasn't a launch, it's a test. So here is a lesson for everybody out there who has a product, a service, your own career, is pick a place that you can test it. Where can you test it? See, most of the time when I say to somebody, test something, what they do is they ask their mom. Well, usually your mom is going to say, wow, that's really nice. Or they ask friends, and their friends are going to give you this kind of confirmation bias and say, well, wow, that looks really good. Or, yeah, it's really, yeah. Now, none of that is a real test. See, a test is people who don't know you, who, when you walk up, now I'm not saying you randomly walk up to people. You could, I mean, I guess you could, but you want to be in an environment where people are going to ask the right questions or have this sense about what you do. So what we did is we worked like crazy to get ready in July. Hard to believe how long ago July was, but we were working like crazy, because what we wanted to do is do what's called an ARC, an advanced reader copy. And we wanted to put it in front of people and get their reaction. And so what we did is we worked very hard. And here's what the advanced reader copy is. By the way, it has a different title than the book today. And what we did is we walked into a place called Freedom Fest in July. And in fact, we started going around and meeting people. And we started handing them things. We were starting to hand them, business cards that talked about the book. So we would pull out and say, by the way, here's a business card that showed it. And then we had a postcard, and then we had only a certain number of advanced reader copies. But what we were trying to do is we were trying to get raw, quick reaction, because see, when you get somebody's raw, quick reaction, guess what happens? What happens is that you have people who, without thinking, just start talking and saying, wow, okay, this looks good, or this looks interesting. So we started handing this book out to people. And as we did, we discovered the title that we have today. Now, it was buried on the cover because it was really the second line, which is most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. And when we started getting people like Glenn Beck and Herman Cain and Kevin Harrington and George Gilder And the list keeps going on. Every person that looked at it, they started, and of course we had Heather Wagenhals. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Heather. But we had Heather who did an interview with me. We also had a guy named James Brown, and no, it's not that James Brown, but it's still a James Brown. Hardest working man in show business. But anyway, started getting interviews, and everybody said the same thing. Most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes, and their reaction was, "Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That's what it is." So we changed the name to most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. It just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize it, position to win. Now, why was it called Position to Win in the first place? And that's because as I read the book, the original book in 1981, whenever I would give somebody a copy, and I've given out between my brother and I 700 copies of this book. So it's not like I'm a kind of almost a believer, right? I've given it out to lots of people. And what I would do is I would always write their name, Bob, position yourself as a winner, not position to win, but position yourself as a winner, and sign it and date it and hand it to people. In fact, I got the job that moved me to California in some part because of that book. But the point of it is that I love saying position to win. However, the winner is most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes, which is absolutely a fact. And here's why. So if some of you are wondering, can you back that up? Can you really prove it? Well, businesses fail over a period of time, but in the first 5 minutes, they fail to do what? To position themselves, to understand what their position is. Turn around after turn around after turn around. I can tell you, people do not position themselves. People do not figure out what their position is. Gabe and I went and met with a husband and wife team that had been in business for like 22 years. When we started asking them about their position and where they fit, they believed they had a pretty good handle. Well, we felt good. Hey, that's going to be great. However, Gabe and I are sitting there in their conference room. We're utilizing Google and Amazon and other resources, and we're kicking up more information in an hour than it appeared that they thought about in 22 years. Why? Because our bend is you have to know where you're positioned, because if you don't, you will eventually fail. So the book launched, if you will, not really launched, but we did the advanced reader copies. And then, as most people would not do, but we did, is we came back and we committed ourselves to really fleshing out and filling out the book. Now that was frustration. We hit a point of burnout. We had to work through that. And I can tell you that there is a reason to do that in your life. So when you're working on a project, sometimes you just got to keep pushing it and pushing it. Each project has its own rhythm and its own sense about what's going to happen. Gabe, anything you want to talk about our Vegas experience? Also, Sandra helped us get some wonderful video with Glenn Beck. And Sandra hadn't even joined us, but we ended up getting some wonderful video with Glenn and talking to him. And I don't even know I don't think she did it intentionally, but we were able to get a little bit of free time just with Glenn, in spite of the throng who wanted to see Glenn. So it wasn't like she threw herself across the door and said, stop, they've got to do it. But.
Yeah, I thought it's a perfect summary there, because so we talked about the first story in the book, right? And this is the last story in the book. And this is us. Okay. So, and this is actually a very important lesson for us to be able to do, and really for anybody. Like, this is how you launch a book. We didn't go into, an echo chamber of our own confirmation, of our own, brilliance, let's say. And we figured out, okay, well, yeah, we're so smart, we're going to be able to do this. We went out and tested it. And that's what gave us all the feedback. And yeah, being at that event with real copies of the book, most of the book was there, or let's say a big chunk of the book was there. And so it was interesting to be able to test that with real life people that don't know you, because that's what you want. You want to put it out there. And then Sandra, really helped us out. She was there. She was working away, and we kind of had a little bit of established a relationship with her because she had been at that event before, and we've talked to her before because she was working with somebody there, and so she said, hey, this is what's happening, and Glenn Beck is going to be doing some book signings, and we said, but wait a minute, I thought they said that Glenn Beck wasn't going to be doing any book signings. Well, it turns out that somebody changed our mind. I don't know. Well, for good fortune, but also because we were there, we were ready, we were prepared. I believe we were like the second or third group in line to have the book signed. And so before anybody really awoke to the idea that, yeah, you got to get in line. Okay. After that fact, we actually had to move Glenn from a side room to the main room, which, it took at least 15 minutes extra because we were busy with Glenn. But that's, that story, deserves its own, section, and really fleshing that out because it's quite fascinating. But yeah, all of that came about because we worked hard, we were ready, we had the imagination, we adapted, we took in the feedback, even from Glenn himself, for him to say, oh, position to win. Okay, most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. Wow, I know that to be true. And we have this on video, like, he's looking at it and going, wow, because we're kind of interacting back and forth. We don't know what he's going to say. We had no idea he was going to say that. We didn't go, hey Glenn, grab the book and say something cool about it. No, he grabbed it, he looked at it, he saw, wow. And of course, up to that point, what's interesting to note is that we had made the executive decision to change the name of the book. We just thought, hey, that's a great line to have on the cover, right? And it wasn't after we had those repeated comments and we kept thinking about it that we went, wait a minute, I think we're gonna have to change the name of the book. And so all of those are lessons in positioning. All those are lessons in business, and all those things have brought us where we are today.
So I know that there are a bunch of you who may have come on and just were hoping that that we would have been on time, but we are on time. I guess you could say we were fashionably late, if you will. So I had teased over the last few weeks and months that I would be revealing a secret about me. Before we do that, I'm just going to point out that if you want an autographed copy, go to positiontowinbook.com, positiontowinbook.com. You buy it directly from us. We'll send you an autographed copy. Gabe was just in California a little over a week ago and signed all of the copies that we have right now. So you can get a dual signature, for your collection. So someday, who knows, that maybe that will be the, that will become worth something amazing.
Your retirement plan.
And that could be your retirement, your legacy for your children. But anyway, you can go do that. And of course you can get it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, Powell's, all over the place. Go to your local bookstore and pound the table and say, you got to bring this book in. Most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. If you use my last name, Mendocha, it turns out that when I plugged that into Amazon, because we ended up being like having a little bit like being on Tourette's. I mean, we were just like totally buzzed, and we just kept wanting to see our name come up, and I would just type in my name. And when I typed in Mendocha, it showed me a variety of things. Nobody was an author that had my last name, but what it did show, I never got the screen captured, but what it showed was this stuff called udder cleaner. So this is for if you have dairy cows, and you can then clean their udders, and somehow the word Mendocha is put in there somewhere. So and of course, since
is
Sandra,
the secret Mendocha formula, John.
Yeah,
udder cleaning. I mean, everybody knows this. Right?
Now,
Sandra in Nebraska uses it every day, probably.
Got the big industrial size. So we thought about maybe using that as a premium. You get the book, and then we send you some udder cleaning, and who knows, maybe because of the maybe that's the secret coronavirus cure or something. I don't know. I'm just kidding. So anyway,
you never know. You never know until you try, right?
You never know. So as you probably know, there's a lot in a name. And even though I had gone through this, chicken soup thing, I wasn't really cognizant of that, but I was raised a Catholic. And in the process of that, and here's the big reveal, in the process of that, and I've never really talked about this in public, is that there's a whole series of rituals that you go through. You go through your first communion. You go, first you got to get baptized, then you go through your first communion. And my mother was very religious, never drank, never smoked. My grandmother, she went every day to mass, and it's the one who made the chicken soup. And serious background there. And so as you're coming up on what's called your confirmation, is that you have to pick another name. Now, I think in Latin America, you got to pick like 5 names, but anyway, in the US, you only get to pick one. And, I'm just trying to figure out which way is up at that certain age. And so I start looking for names. Now, coming from an Eastern European background, my brother picked a name that was very Eastern European, Stanislaus. And I was like, man, the last thing I want to do is like ever tell anybody that. I mean, again, it just didn't, I didn't see myself and, think about that. I didn't think about being, thank goodness that my mother didn't follow my grandfather, who was from Germany, who wanted, thought there'd be cool names like Dieter. That I probably would have been a better fighter if I was named Dieter, because I would have had to, either get my ass kicked or kick somebody's ass over it. But anyway, I ended up with my name, John Paul. And the interesting thing about John Paul is that once I recognized what that was, and the fact there really was a story, because I asked my parents, I don't know if you ever did, well, where did my name come from? Well, my name came from a very important place. First off, my mother being so religious, John and Paul and the Bible and all of that. So you got those two guys, right? John the Baptist, Paul, the apostle. I mean, you got that covered. And then, but my father was in the Navy. So, John Paul Jones was, started the U.S. Navy, father of the Navy. So it worked out great. He was happy, she was happy. I have that. Now, as I was growing up, I actually started using John Paul, but it was kind of tough because it wasn't like a hyphenated name, and in school there was no, there's no little block to put that in. So it worked out pretty well. And then my friends would ask me the question about, because we were asking, where'd your name come from, and where'd this come from? And people were named after their grandfather, like my brother was named after, we had a great grandfather that was named Michael, so he was named Michael. And so anyway, so I had this, and nobody was named John Paul, so so I was John Paul. And what happened is that since my friends were not great at math, is I told them, because I wanted to get a little bit of fame even at an early age, is that what John Paul was, is I was named, my parents were so cool, which is about as far away from the truth. I mean, they were nice, but they weren't really cool. They weren't hip parents, right? So I kept telling them that it had to do with the Beatles, that the Beatles, being named after John and Paul. Now, nobody had actually like done the math and realized that, the Beatles weren't famous when I was conceived and born, but, hey, let that go. Right. I mean, never let truth get in the way of fame. So I kept doing that, and that was pretty cool. But here comes this confirmation thing, and it's like, John, you got to come up with a name. And, and you can't, you can't come up with weird, because this is like, we're rolling in towards the 70s. So you can't come up with some weird name, like, who knows what kind of weird name I would have come up with. But I had a bunch of names, and I kept looking. And it's partially why we're launching it today. So what I did was I came up with the name Patrick. So, hey, St. Patrick, beat the crap out of snakes or something, a party hardy drinking kind of saint. I mean, my kind of guy. So that is the big reveal. So it's John Paul Patrick. Now, I haven't used that a lot. In fact, years ago when I thought about writing fiction, because I've thought a lot about writing, I actually do a lot of speaking, do a lot of other things. I have a weekly webinar called Speed Start Monday that I just did 810th episode of that. So I write, but I haven't like written. This is really the first real book. Okay. Not ghost written, I didn't hire, somebody to, just slap my name on it. So I thought, perfect. We'll do it on St. Patrick's Day. What a better day. I mean, they're going to have parades. They're going to have all of that. It's going to be fantastic. You know, in New York City, they're going to have that. In Chicago, they're going to turn the river green. Guinness is going to be talking about this.
It's always green, John.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a different issue.
Oh, different shade of green. Yeah.
And of course, I thought that would be great because we'll use that. It'll be a good hook and all of that. And of course, the red virus, the coronavirus, just kicked my ass on that. But anyway, it's Patrick. So it's John Paul Patrick. Now, funny part about my name is as I kept moving into business circles and using John Paul, is that I would in fact want people to remember it, because if I try to get people to say Mendocha, and we've now discovered this now that I'm doing radio interviews and have done some other interviews,
Mondoc
is getting Mendocha out of them is tough. I mean, it's like a course I have to give them, and it isn't that many letters. I mean, I know it's 8 letters, but it's just hard. And
we need a link, affiliate link for Hooked on Phonics.
Hooked on,
exactly.
exactly.
We can get them up and running. MEN, right? And how do those sound together, right? Okay, and because like some people they're literally calling you John Paul Mondoc, like, what?
Exactly.
Read that again. It's like, wow, these people. Anyways.
Oh, well, and my favorite interview is the guy who, over a course of, I don't know, what was it, 9 minutes, changed the pronunciation of my name like
9 times.
Yeah, like 9 different times. Every time he said it, it kept changing around. I mean, I didn't even think I was the guest anymore after a while.
That's right. It's like, wow, I wonder who that guy is. Oh, wait, it's me.
It's me. Wait a second, he's talking to me. So it's but the John Paul thing has always worked well for me because I could leave my last name out of it. And what I would do is people would ask me about the name and I'd say John Paul. So they named, 2 Beatles, 2 popes, because there was 2 popes named John Paul. And I had John Paul before they had John Paul, right? Because of course, these guys were, they were given that when they, the white smoke cleared and, hey, this is your pope name. And the best part about that is that Steve Forbes, I like Steve Forbes a lot. And we were saddened that Steve wasn't at Freedom Fest last year, because I would have loved to have given it to him. But the first time I met Steve Forbes years ago, and I was at a book signing that he was doing, and I said John Paul, and I said 2 Beatles, 2 popes. Well, after that, again, Steve Forbes meets how many people in a year? A lot. And every year after that, he would remember me by looking at me and saying, "There's the Pope." So there you go. So I can then give you your benediction and say, probably the smartest thing you could do today, if you're now stuck in quarantine and you're wondering, what am I going to do? And how am I going to do some things? Well, here is my totally unbiased opinion, which is you ought to pick up a copy of Most Businesses Fail in the First 5 Minutes. It just takes you 3 to 5 years to realize it. Position to Win. And really proud and happy that you were able to come on and we got this figured out and done. I'm John Paul Mendocha, and Gabe Batista and I are co-conspirators, co-authors, and business partners on this. Sandra, do we have a question? Any question?
Earlier, somebody commented, "Don't panic about your COVID-19 utter speak."
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think the virus is what killed my my link to getting on Facebook. So, but anyway, all right. So
I have a question.
Okay,
what's
sure.
your best memory with Gabe during this whole experience?
Best memory with Gabe would be, that's a good question, would be that Gabe and I ended up, he came back from being at the Facebook conference, now canceled for this year.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, hey, let's really get serious and let's see if we can get this book written. So we get an Airbnb in Arrow Bear, California. And Arrow Bear is a little community perched on the side of the mountains between Lake Arrowhead and Big Bear Lake. And we go to this kind of funky house, and we kind of locked ourselves into it. And the first day that we're there, we're like, oh, we got to go get something to eat, foraging for food. And we ended up going to this restaurant, and outside, and we knew it was the perfect restaurant for us. is outside next to the dumpster was this big giant banner sign that said world's best enchiladas. Now that's a pretty tall order. And we walked in and there were like, I don't know what, 8 to 12 tables and booths. And there was one table being utilized. And we went there every single day. So my best memory is that every day we would work like crazy on it. But every morning we knew that we had the rock. We could go in and we could eat at the world's best enchiladas. And by the way, nobody ever even asked us if we wanted enchiladas at the restaurant. So that was my best memory. Gabe, what was yours?
Oh man, yeah, that's funny. We actually have a picture of the world's best enchilada place
in the book.
In the book. So
Yeah.
if you want to, yeah, there's another reason to get the book. I mean, if you just want to see the picture of this place, you know, because as soon as we saw it, I was like, okay, I gotta take a picture of that. Because like you know, that's a classic, you know, positioning. Let's just say lesson. Let's just say lesson. We all learn from that. It's like, wow, they have the world's. Because I mean, who's gonna say no? I mean, there was a total of how many restaurants in this town? Less than 10 that I counted.
Oh
right?
yeah. Yep.
So it was like, well, it was really, so you could drive a little bit and you'll find the world's best enchilada place and then nothing, or you could go to the other way and find a couple more places. But you know, that was it. Yep. So my favorite has to be the kind of the inception of this whole thing, the start of all this, which was here in Plano, which is a suburb north of Dallas here. And we started talking about this. I remember beginning of 2018 was a rocky year for me and my business. And I was doing some client work and I was trying to figure out why, you know, some of these things didn't work. And so by that time you and I have been talking a lot about positioning and we've kind of over the phone kind of said, hey, maybe we should do something. It'd be cool to, you know, map this out. But it was during that meeting that finally we said, you know, it would be really cool to start talking about these things. And actually we have a picture of this too in the book, which is, again, John and I speaking. And I remember we mapped some things out and you were explaining some things to me. And I remember thinking, well, and I'm not like a big picture guy. I know some people are always taking pictures of all this different things. I'm really not. I mean, not necessarily against it either, but I just thought, you know, I let me ask our waitress, hey, could you take a picture of us? And she's like, sure. And she took a picture and look at that. That picture made it all the way to the book, right? Without even knowing how this was going to turn out. So yeah, that's probably my favorite moment. The moment that we decided to go on something, and not just because we decided to do it, but because now in you know, thinking about it retrospectively, you complete that. I mean, like a 2-year project. I mean, how many people, you know, can't even keep a New Year's resolution for a week, let alone, you know, a 2-week journey, a 2-year journey. And so, yep, we did that. And so I'm proud of that.
Excellent. All right.
Got a couple questions. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So first one, why is positioning important in the current environment with the coronavirus? And then when you answer that, I'll go to the other one.
Well, positioning becomes even more important in the middle of a crisis because what happens is that all of these other lesser thoughts get blocked out because people become obsessed with whatever that crisis is in front of them, right? And the example that I used to be able to use is that the day before somebody finds out they have cancer, life is pretty easy, right? You know, they've got, you know, they're thinking about this, they're thinking about that, you know, maybe I'll go, you know, maybe we're going to go to this kind of vacation, or, you know, I'm going to put off doing this and I'm going to put off doing that. But as soon as they get that diagnosis, as soon as they have that uh-oh moment, it tends to just really focus the mind and block everything else out. So if you're in business or you're doing anything at all with trying to connect with people, once this happened, the coronavirus is just blocking everything else out, and people aren't thinking about this other, more elaborate things. I mean, Maslow called it, hierarchy of needs. Well, people are now very much focused on survival and what's going to happen and how this is going to take place. And once that happens, is that they shut down and they quit thinking about other things. So the reason why positioning becomes so important is that as you get these fragments of time, will they think about you, and how will you fit into that? I've got a client, a long-term friend, who's got an event coming up in May, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, because in my opinion, that event will not happen, not the way they think it will, because people will still be shell shocked. I mean, May's still a ways away, but who would have thought even a week ago that we would be shutting down restaurants all over the place, or movie theaters are closing down, or all of this taking place, or people would be standing outside the Costco. Or yesterday when I was at the Costco and the guy drove up, and they told everybody, the guy yelled out, the water truck has arrived, and people started spontaneously clapping for a semi truck filled with water. And there were, from my guess, there were 150 people in line inside the Costco to buy one case of water apiece. Now, I didn't buy water. I wasn't there to buy water. I was buying some other stuff. And in fact, an 81-year-old man rushes up with his water, and that's all he was buying. And he was so dominated by that was his only thought. And I said, you could have bought something else. And he's like, nope, I need to make sure I had water. So I let him go in front of me in line. He was very happy because he wanted to get out of there, because he was just afraid he was going to catch it and it was going to be a goner and all that. So it tends to block everything else out. So positioning becomes even more important. And then also how you position yourself. Now, if you ever thought about doing a pivot, this is going to cause a lot of you to have to pivot, because things aren't going to go back the way they were. I saw that in full effect in 9/11. I saw that over the years in other circumstances, like when technological changes happened. So yeah, that's where I think positioning becomes even more important today than ever before, because you're now fighting against the coronavirus and taking up people's thoughts.
All right. The next question is, how does positioning relate to having a USP?
So you can't have a unique selling proposition as delineated by Rosser Reeves in his spectacular book, Reality in Advertising, which, by the way, is the only book that sits on my desk. So I'm a big fan of Rosser. But what I can tell you is that most people mistakenly think that what they do is they're going to write a USP. However, there's no authenticity, there's no credibility unless you actually have a position. So you really can't have a good USP unless you actually have a great position. So think about it this way. If Starbucks, which has a position as the coffee maker, decided that they were going to start selling pizza, and they would write a great USP about Starbucks making fantastic pizza, it would fail miserably. And it would fail miserably, not because they didn't have a cool sounding USP. A USP is really is a statement about something that you do that's unique and specific. So to me, you have to have positioning before you can have a USP. If you do it the other way around, you really have a false USP. And I know that this isn't quite biblical, but I mean, hey, I've got 3 names that are tied to the Bible. So let me tell you that one of those tablets should have had, however you're positioned is how people think about you, and therefore thou shalt not have false USPs, because false USPs fail, and they fail miserably.
I'll take a little bit of that question too, because
Sure.
Something that I thought about for a very long time is, and there is a lot to be said for USP, and I think a USP is not something that is not important. It is important, but it definitely, like John says, comes after having a position, and the USP, the name itself, betrays that fact. If you actually look at it, unique selling proposition. The word proposition contains the word position in there, right? In other words, once you have determined the landscape, then you take a little piece right? And then you define what that proposition, right? That before the position happens, right? That thing that's going to go kind of nested in there. So you can have, for example, if you have a good position in the market, right, which is more the strategy, a USP and branding and all these other things are kind of like the tactics to implement that. As a matter of fact, you can have a brand, a position that has nested inside of it many different propositions depending on what you're going to be going on, right? Amazon Web Services has a different proposition that than its e-commerce, than its advertising services, right? That they're kind of like they're in there, but they work or they don't based on their position. So yes, I would definitely define USP as more of a tactic, and it's good and it's important. You need to have those. You need to start encapsulating those. You need to be able to, you know, if you, again, if we can refer back to the guy that it kind of fleshes out and talks about USPs. So, well, of course, I can say what I think a USP is, or somebody else can say what they think what a USP is. But, you know, Ross Arif is a guy that says, okay, here's what a USP is. And he gives examples of sentences that become USPs, right? As a matter of fact, he's known for some of the most, poster boy USPs that there are, right? Like melts in your mouth, not in your hands, right? And so he says, look, this is what a USP is. And so that he's saying that it is more of a semantical, more of a encapsulation, more of a being able to describe using language at least one aspect of your positioning. But positioning, as even the name itself says, comes before it.
Good point. All right, Sandra, what else do we have?
All right. How is positioning used in an elevator pitch? What would one say verbally to position themselves as unique?
Well, that's an easy to answer in 30 seconds. Well, if you're going to have an elevator pitch, you already have a position. So when you show up, you already have a position, and you're sitting there and you're trying to describe what you do. So one of the things is that you have to define where you fit. So when you look at the elevator pitch that I use, is I always talk about the fact that I was a professional gambler turned serial entrepreneur who then eventually became a turnaround specialist. Now, those three statements position me in people's minds. Now, I don't say I'm a Harvard MBA who has experience in mergers and acquisitions and worked on Wall Street for 22 years. That's a different set of statements. So when you're putting this together, you have to take what you've genuinely owned, what you genuinely have done. And the challenge that happens constantly is that people don't necessarily want to say, okay, this is what I do. Now, is that all that I do? Well, there's lots of stuff that I've done in my life, but those three statements strung together very much summarize and will elicit that response that I'm looking for. And what you're looking for is, what is their reaction to it? This is why, if you want to see an elevator pitch that doesn't work, is go watch the ads for, Bud Light, fruity, fizzy nonsense. First off, we're supposed to be selling beer, but now we're selling, fruit drink, seltzer water, and doing that. Well, all I can tell you is that every time you break that, you in fact destroy positioning. So in my opinion, that hopefully that helps. That in my opinion, that's what you need. You need to encapsulate what you do in the shortest period that you possibly can. More importantly, I would say, if somebody's got that elevator pitch, is that you need to tell them a story instead of exclamations about who you are. Not exclamation points, but how you're citing who you are. But it's something we could spend a day talking about, and we do with clients. All right. Anything else?
I guess my only other question would be, what are some words of advice you have for others wanting to publish their book?
Well, after this process, first off, don't launch a book when you have a global pandemic that has now absorbed.
Step one.
That's so predicting global pandemic. So write that down first. I'm going to predict that. Um,
You got to look in the calendar or check out the weather and make sure that there's not a pandemic scheduled, right? Because if it is, then just make sure you delay it, kind of do something else. But if it says in the calendar, global pandemic, then that's not a good time. Not a good time. No.
But in a serious note, what I would say is that if you actually want to do and write a book, and I have been, at the struggling end of that pool for a very long time, is that you have to figure out how you're going to get it done and what resources you're going to have to get it done with. And I'll summarize it by this. Now, Gabe speaks Spanish. Obviously, it's his first language. My wife will tell you that if learning Spanish was possible by buying computer software, audio cassettes in the day, flashcards, CDs, DVDs, you name all the different ways that I can learn Spanish. But if it was just buying those things, then you know what? I would be able to say lots of good stuff in Spanish right now. But if you're going to write up, and the point of it is that it is less important what tools you have. You don't need to go buy a new laptop, probably. You don't need to go do a lot of these other things. What you have to do is you have to say, I'm going to work through this and write the book. And you should expect that you're going to get lots of pushback. You're going to have to expect that sometimes you're going to have to take and reshuffle the deck, which we had to do. We changed chapter locations. We went through a lot of pain and suffering, but you have to be willing to stick to it throughout the entire process. When Hemingway said, writing is easy, you just open up a vein and bleed. There's a lot to be said for that. So if you want to write a book, start writing a book. The real question is will you have the discipline to stick to it? And this is the ultimate test. When you are sick of it, will you actually keep working towards it and get it done? And hopefully you don't experience that, but I have. Now, we're not going to wait 30 years to get the next one out. Hopefully, because if not, I'm going to have to eat better. So. But I can tell you that we, I've learned a lot about how to get it done faster. So hopefully that helps anybody who's out there. And if you want to go figure out how to write a book, start working at writing a book and less about all of the things that you need to do. In my journey, I have been to many different seminars on how to write a book. And all I can tell you is you don't actually write a book while you're sitting in a seminar. You get cool stories, you get cool things, you get this, you get that. And is there a right way to write a book? The answer, in my opinion, is no. It's will you actually get it done? That's the only thing that matters.
All right, we had one more come in.
Okay.
How is this different from the it says NEA celebrity advice? Maybe they meant to say any celebrity advice.
I don't know what the celebrity advice is.
That's what it says. Sorry.
Celebrity advice. Well, okay.
Yeah, I don't know what Richard. So if you're out there, Richard, if you could clarify what that means.
Yeah, toss it on there.
We can do it. But yeah, we had a few people, over 10 people, watch our launch, and we're glad that we were again doing our part to be out there. Even though, here you go. What is the biggest mistake? Oh, he's just putting another one. Consultants make when in positioning themselves. So what is the biggest mistake consultants make in positioning themselves? Well, it's like there's like 26 that I can think of off the top of my head.
I would say the biggest mistake consultants make is that when you need money and somebody says they have a problem, the first thing you do is figure out how to shoehorn what you have so you can collect that dough, and that you don't want to stay in your lane. Mm-hmm. And I certainly was part of that. I mean, I learned how to do accounting because my very first consulting client, in spite of me not having a single accounting class because I hadn't gone to college, in spite of not having gone to a single computer class, I helped somebody computerize their business and build their accounting system, which, by the way, worked. But I was willing to do a lot of free stuff and busted my hump. Now, ask me how many I did after that, and the answer would be 0. Because what I learned is that the best positioning that you can do as a consultant is figure out what you're good at and do that. Now, here's the downside of that, because there's a lot of really good, happy, unicorns dancing and cotton candy trees kind of advice that says, do what you love and the money will follow. And that is absolutely not true, because you can do whatever you love, but the money is only the amount of money that's available that somebody will pay for that kind of advice.
Yep.
So just understand that you may not make as much as you thought you were going to make, but figure out what you're really good at and position yourself to be that person. I'm very good at selling, but what I discovered is that very famous person said, John, nobody wants to learn how to sell, and used a lot of profanity, which we're not going to do right now. Have to come to a live event and I'll use a lot of it for you. But what I will tell you is that
it's a bonus.
It's a bonus. Yeah, it's a bonus. But what I can tell you is that you have to then rename that. So what I did was I went from being a sales expert, still talk about sales, but really became a turnaround expert and started learning as much as I could about how to do turnarounds, because here are the numbers, real numbers. Training people and organizations how to sell, which have an absolute effect on their bottom line, is X, and doing turnarounds is Y. And Y is, as I experienced, was triple the money. I could get triple the money if I was doing turnarounds versus being the sales trainer. And you may say, John, what was one of the first things you did? And the first thing I did was define a sales process and do some sales training. But
Wow.
I know it's a little shocking.
Wow.
So that hopefully that helps you out, because what you got to do is you got to figure out what you can do and figure out how that fits, and then figure out how to label it. Labeling it is different than branding, but how do you label it, and how do you then ask yourself, what does that position look like inside of the head of the prospect?
Yep.
So Sandra, have we pulled the last bucket of water up?
We got a clarification on that last question.
Oh,
so
okay.
It says, how is this different from all the coaching companies out there advising us to be a celebrity in our niche?
Oh, well, so that's okay. So if you have a niche, you have to think about who is the celebrity in the niche. Gabe and I had an opportunity to meet somebody through this project who decided that they wanted to be the next, Tony Robbins. And as far as I know, since Tony is in pretty good shape and he's not on, knocking on heaven's door, it's going to be tough to be the next Tony Robbins. So you got to be somebody else.
Yep. Yeah. So go ahead, John.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, well, so the mistake I think people make all the time is they say, I want to be a celebrity. Well, okay. Yeah. But a celebrity is one thing, an expert is another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that advice, by if you just grab it out of context, it's good advice. I mean, whatever you're doing, be the celebrity. Okay. But how do you actually do that? Okay. And one of the things that really differentiates positioning and the stuff that we do is that it is actually strategic. Now, there are a lot of books that say strategy on them that are not strategic. There are many people who talk about strategy and use the word strategy, and it has nothing to do with strategy. It's just a word, right? Right. You don't. It's like like politicians. They love to use that word, and corporate guys, big company guys. They say something like, "We're coming up with a sales strategy." Yeah, it's like I guess like the hungry person would come up with a food strategy, right? Just like that, right? Like if you, this is a short analysis. If you want, this is a shortcut for good analysis, logic analysis. If you're ever hear anybody use the word strategy, if you take the word strategy out and it doesn't make it clear, like the thought clear, more clear, then you're not talking strategy. And I don't have time to go into why that is, but that's just a shortcut. Now, there's 3 things to strategy according to a guy that knew a little bit about strategy. His name is Sun Tzu, about 2,500 years ago, right? Sun Tzu says 3 things. He says there's basically three things to strategy: your army, you. So in this case, your company, or if you're a consultant, this is your army. And your army is your assets, your resources, your time, your money, all of that. So that's aspect one. Aspect two of strategy is their army, right? The guys that you're fighting against. What do they have? How many people? How much money? How many? All that, right? That's the second aspect. And the third aspect of strategy is what is this the landscape where you're fighting. Okay, so the problem with when somebody tells you, look, what you need to do is be a celebrity, is that they're only talking about aspect one, and they talk about it as if as the rest is a vacuum, right? And it doesn't exist, right? So if you just become men, you got to have the right. And what do these people sell you? They'll sell you the celebrity package. Heck, I would sell it, right? If you buy from me, I'll sell it to you. But the celebrity package is the lights, right? The video, the social media, the website, the all these tools and techniques of doing stuff, right? But that, and just like Sun Tzu says, the tactics without the strategy is the noise before defeat. Because if you don't understand the other army, what do they have, and where the heck are we fighting, then you're gonna lose. So I mean, all these guys, yeah. And so if you take just that little piece, it's not bad advice if you can make it. But chances are that in every market, in every industry, in every niche, there is already a celebrity. So now it is your job to make the case that you're going to be another celebrity or a better celebrity, and this is difficult because if that space is already occupied, you can't say, well, you know what? There are these guys, kind of small guys. One of them is Coke and the other one is Pepsi. But see, I have something better. Well, you're really going to have to make a very strong case of that and spend a whole lot of money, and which I would not advise it. Of course, if you hire me, we'll work at it. But it's not going to be successful. It just won't. So that's why that's the fundamental difference between the celebrity. These are all the same guys that are selling you branding. These are all the same guys that are selling you. What you gotta have is good copy, right? You got to learn how write really good copy. If you write really good copy, you'll be able to sell anything. It's like, no. Also, these guys will sell you funnels, which are tools, and will sell you, if you do really good marketing, you don't have to sell anybody at all. Like all these are, again, tools and techniques at most. And they're very little of them are tactics, and they're totally not strategic. And you're going to go out there and you're going to be defeated because you don't understand the landscape and you don't understand the other guys or yourself, right? If you don't understand yourself and the enemy, the adversary, man, you're just not going to be in good shape.
And that's all. I think that's all really good advice. I will add one element to it, is that if you decide that you want to be a celebrity, and that you're going to be a celebrity in your niche, whatever that niche is that there's going to be a few things that you have to do. So I'm going to give you the real condensed version. First off is you have to take controversial positions. You cannot be the mainstream bland. Second, that means you're going to have people who are going to not be happy with you. I have a client who could be a lot more famous than he is, but he doesn't take criticism very well. And I'm not talking about criticism like, well, I don't know if I like your shoes matching your belt kind of thing. I'm talking about people who get really pissed about your position that you hold. So you have to be able to take some controversial position. Second thing is that this means if you decide that you want to go the celebrity route, is that you're going to need to bang the drum all the time. Bang the drum all the time. One of the things that Gabe and I said early on in Vegas, by the way, I've left out my brother Michael, who was instrumental in helping us at Freedom Fest. Don't want to leave him out of that. But we were banging the drum. We split up, and all three of us were walking around, banging the drum, holding up the book. Are you book worthy? Are you book worthy? Should you even deserve to get a book? Should you even think about getting a book? And you have to bang the drum and bang the drum and bang the drum and bang the drum. And that means that we came up with a rule that we almost didn't adhere to ourselves, which is you should never leave, now that we have a book, should never leave any location without carrying one of these books, So when somebody says, wow, do you know which way it is to the bathroom? Yes, I do. By the way, have you seen my new book? Because you want to be able to say that you're always doing this. I was traveling with a somewhat famous author, and we were standing in a Barnes and Noble, and there was a copy of his book. And I said to him, hey, you need to go sign a copy of the book. You need to go talk to somebody. Well, he had to take a call and he stepped outside. I was standing in that section and somebody was looking for a book in this area. And I said, have you seen this one? And I pulled it out and she goes, no. And I said, that's the author outside on the phone. She bought the book. So you have to really understand that you're going to have to wade in there and do that, because if you're going to get people's attention, you're going to have to do it all the time. So if you want to be a celebrity, I'm not going to try to tell you not to be a celebrity, but you are the person who has to be that person who's always banging that drum, always presenting that. And here's the other final little piece, which I can tell you lots and lots of people don't do, is you're going to have to think about how you're going to go out and have somebody who's going to do publicity. Somebody's going to have to do something to do that beyond where you are. Big mistake that I see a lot of people do is that they don't think in terms of, I'm going to have to hire people to do what? Amplification. We're trying to amplify what we're doing. And you're going to have to keep pushing that and pushing that and pushing that. And I can tell you when you'll know that you're at the right spot, which is when you're sick and tired of the stories, you don't want to tell that story again, but somebody says, tell me that story that you ... That's when you know that you've gotten to that fame point. And what you have to do is you should say that story, tell that story with as much impassioned vigor as you possibly can, because it's the first time they've heard you tell that story. And it is the millionth and first time that you've told that story. And you know what? You got to keep doing that. And all I'd have to do is say, you got to keep banging the drum. Sandra, any more?
All right, there's one more.
Okay, this will be the last. Well, this will be the
very
last
last.
one. Now you
Okay.
can keep sending them through. So how do they join the Facebook group?
So they can go to positionwinbook.com. There's a link to join the group there. They can go to Facebook and put in their search bar Position to Win Facebook group. Also it's connected to John's page. So if you like John Paul Mendocha's page on Facebook, my page on Facebook, Gabe Batista. And so, yeah, but probably the easiest one is you go to positionwinbook.com. There's a bunch of links there. You can get the book. Also, you can sign up for the group, and also you can subscribe to the podcast, where we have a lot of back and forth between John and I. We've had 22 episodes, so a lot of material there, useful for everybody.
And you can ask questions. So this will be the last question for the book launch, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly. All right, Sandra, make it a good one.
Is it advisable to be dramatic in our messaging to position ourselves in a crowded market?
Well, I would take the word dramatic and say you have to have an emotional appeal. It has to have some kind of an emotional appeal. And this is why people are so, crazy today with the current virus, is that they're not thinking logically. They're having an emotional response. Humans are by our nature reaction machines. We react to circumstances and situations. If you are very dull in what you say, because again, you've used the word dramatic, but if you're very dull, I can tell you that in all likelihood, you're probably not going to get heard. Positioning has to do with laying out what your position is. That's the cornerstone. But when you actually are presenting your message and you're delivering your message, the more that you can actually engage people and make them laugh and cry and move towards you and get excited and get their blood going, the more likely you'll be successful. So my answer to that is simply, what can you do to do that? Now, the most important thing you can do is also be careful that you don't push it too far. I know a lot of copywriters, and what the copywriters end up doing is that they don't judge the market they're trying to sell into. And therefore they end up with, so if you're selling something to an individual, business to consumer versus business to business, is that you have to be careful of what I have called Batman language, Batman copy. And Batman's because that was my favorite comic book growing up. And if you have a lot of pow and whiff and all of that kind of over the top stuff, is that people will take you as not being serious. So you have to
Boom,
make sure that it,
smack,
yeah,
crack,
it,
bam.
it got it.
That was cool. That was cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it has to match. So if it doesn't match, and it's message to position match. I mean, it's not message, I know Dan Kennedy, message to market match, but it's message to position. Your position is more important. I mean, yeah, there's a market. I agree with Dan,
Sure.
but there's an intermediate step. You got to have that position. So yes,
Absolutely.
you can be dramatic, you can be emotional, but it has to make sure that it matches, because if it doesn't match, if it doesn't ring true, it will be a false premise and will fail in that regard. So you want to test it, and you don't want to go too crazy. On the other side, if you're too boring, that's the other sin. So you're going to say, wait a second, I've gotten lots of mixed messages, and that is called the minefield of messaging. There's lots of mines out there. And remember, there's only one thing a mine does. I'm talking about a landmine, sadly, is to slow down progress and to disable people. All right. Any last words, Gabe, before we wrap up?
I think this has been great. What a journey. How many lessons, how many things to be proud of, how much work it's been. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night and I go, the index, God, the index, I'm working on another index. All kinds of crazy work to be able to do this. This is why this is a very good disqualifier. Anybody that puts themselves through this kind of hell, through this kind of super difficult, painful process, in all areas, not just creating the content. The content is almost sometimes like the least of your problems. Well, I guess depends on the kind of person you are, but yeah, there's so many things. And so I'm super proud, super happy. And so we're glad that we can call it done. We could say this is the official full circle. This is it. And this has been a great raging verbalist, joined by some journal. So this is Raging Verbalist and Friends.
There you go. And I'll wrap up by saying, thank you all for hanging in there, and go out and buy the book. Most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. It just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize it. And this book is filled not only with stories, not only with anecdotes, but it is filled with lots of exercises, lots of things, diagrams to make you think. And it is designed to do one thing. It's designed to help you understand that if you are not positioned properly, if you do not understand the position that you hold, and if you do not understand the competitive landscape that you are in fact in, that you will be at a deficit. One of my beliefs is that this is an ace, and an ace in poker is the most powerful card. And frankly, if you go and want to deal yourself better cards, you'll deal yourself a better position. And once you do that, you'll find out that you are going to be more successful than you were ever going to be before. It has taken us 742 days, hard to believe, to get to where we are today. But in fact, we're done. We have it. It's out there. It's up on Amazon. And now when somebody goes and types in my name, they won't find Utter Cleaner. They are going to find the book. Most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. It just takes them 5 years to realize it. For those who stumble upon it, who wanted to buy Utter Cleaner, buy the book, because while you're cleaning udders, maybe what you'll do is you'll learn that maybe there's something else you want to do. But for everyone else, go buy the book, enjoy the book, come online, talk to us, send us questions through the through the Facebook group, and we'll do our best to answer those. And remember that every single Friday, 8 a.m., barring catastrophic fun with technology, the
Or global world pandemic.
World pandemic, and this Friday is no different. But come on at 8 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and there'll be another episode of the Raging Verbalist. So I want to do a quick thank you to Gabe, to Sandra. This is John Paul Mendoza Dr. Speech Selling. Yes, the Raging Verbalist. And we are out. Thanks, everybody.